This is 5 and 10 from Skywatch TV for July 16th, 2020. A special program today as we address a specific issue that most of us Americans really don't have a frame of reference for, possibly unless you live on or near Native American tribal lands, which for people in the eastern half of Oklahoma is a lot more people than was last week, thanks to the Supreme Court ruling. Joining us by Skype from Samaria, what the world calls part of the West Bank, in Israel, the CEO of Lipkin Tours and a spokesperson for his settlement there, Ofra. We welcome Aaron Lipkin back to Skywatch TV. Aaron, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Derek, and it's really a great pleasure to be with you again.
Well, it's our honor. Saw you recently on a news report by I-24 News, which is an English language news network that reports on Israel, and you were discussing the sovereignty issue. This is the plan that was touted by Prime Minister Netanyahu, and then it was incorporated in a part of the Trump peace proposal, the so-called deal of the century. But when you start digging into the details, it looks like things get really complicated for Israelis such as yourself who live in Judea and Samaria. What are the issues that you and your neighbors in Ofra are facing, and how do you think things are going to shake out?
Well, first of all, this is definitely a historic point in the history of Israel. What we see is a change, a big change in the dynamics, both internally in Israel and outside of Israel. And I'd like to deal with that first before getting to the way it's going to affect our lives. What we see is, first of all, if we look at the past, we see that the world thought that the reason for all the problems in the Middle East is Israel and the Palestinians, and this Israel was blamed all the time. The idea was that if Israel capitulates, if Israel gives land in Judea and Samaria and the Gaza Strip to establish a Palestinian state, the moment that happens, peace will be ushered and everything will be okay. Everybody would live together happily. That was the concept that continued on until the end of Obama's administration. This is issue number one. Issue number two is the fact that the Israeli population for many years was split between those that supported the sovereignty on Judea and Samaria, meaning having Judea and Samaria as an integral part of Israel, and those that did not want Judea and Samaria part of Israel, but rather wanted this area to become a Palestinian state. So these two major issues were the situation until today. And what we see today is a totally different story. First of all, Israel is the only quiet place in the Middle East. You're looking around you, you see troubles in Lebanon, in Syria, Iraq, Iran, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, and Israel has nothing to do with it. It's all internal struggles between Sunni and Shiite Muslims, between Turkey and Arab countries. Israel is just standing here looking around and saying to ourselves, thank God everything is okay with us. We're living in peace and prosperity, and looking around us and seeing all this mess. So for the first time, after so many years, Israel is not to be blamed for the situation in the Middle East. And the second issue is that the majority of the Jewish population in Israel supports the sovereignty move. So this became already a sort of a consensus among the Jews living in Israel that Judea and Samaria should become part of Israel. So these two issues are very important to understand why we're suddenly talking about this plan, the possibility of it materializing. And add to that a third point, which is the elections in November. Netanyahu wants to end his prime ministry in Israel as the one who applied sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. And I have to say that Netanyahu was traumatized by the Obama administration foreign policy towards Israel, culminating in a move by Obama against Israel in the United Nations that many don't know about.
Oh,
So Netanyahu is really afraid that in November, the situation in the United States will change drastically, and many things will happen. The sanctions against Iran will be lifted. The push for Israel capitulating on land is going to return to the way it was during the Obama administration. So what we have here is 2 to 3 months where Netanyahu wants to take advantage of this window where we have the most supportive U.S. administration we ever had. The time where evangelical Christians are pushing Trump to help Israel, to support Israel, to apply sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. So, these 3 points are crucial to understand why sovereignty is going to happen, and it's going to happen very, very soon. So this is just to give a background to our listeners. The Trump plan is a bit problematic because on the one hand it says, okay, Israel applies sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. You have historical, spiritual, religious rights to these lands. They belong to you according to God's covenants with you. Just go ahead and do it. The communities in Judea and Samaria, the Jewish communities, are here to stay. It acknowledges our eternal existence in this land. Again, when we're looking at what was in the past, the idea that Israel is going to ethnically cleanse Jews from Judea and Samaria in order to establish a Palestinian state in this area. So this is no longer part of the deal. We are here to stay. The Jews of Judea and Samaria are here to stay. So these are all good things that are part of the deal of the century of the U.S. administration. However, we see that the idea of a Palestinian state is still part of the picture. And this is something that we definitely oppose. The Palestinian state idea has only brought terrorism and grief, not just to Jews living in Israel, but also to Arabs. I speak Arabic because of my mother. She's from Cairo. And I have good friends in Arab villages around us. And they're telling me confidentially, Aaron, we are tired of the Palestinian state idea. We had it. The PLO guys that you brought during the Oslo agreements of the 90s, they're corrupt. They are a dictatorship. They're taxing us. The sons of Abu Mazen are taking all the money that we get from international aid and putting it in their pockets. We want Israeli sovereignty. We want to be under Israeli rule. We're looking around us. We see how our brothers are being treated in Syria, Iraq, Iran, Egypt. We know that if we will be under Israeli sovereignty, we will have a good life. And this is a voice that is not sounded on the international media
not
and
at
also
all.
on the Israeli media.
Yeah, not at all.
So what we say is we are for sovereignty, but we are against a Palestinian state.
Now, the map that was drawn, if I understand it correctly, would isolate Ofra and some other Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria. What would that mean if this were imposed according to that map? How would that affect you and your neighbors?
I would say I would divide it to the short term and the long term. In the short term, we're talking about a 4-year period where the U.S. administration and Israel are waiting for the Palestinian leadership to come forth and agree to certain conditions. And what are these conditions? The Palestinians need to stop terrorism. They need to stop funding terrorism. They need to stop paying terrorists for the Jews that they kill. They have to acknowledge Israel as a Jewish nation state. They have to forego on the right of return of Palestinian refugees back into the land of Israel. And there are a couple of other conditions that the Palestinians need to agree to in order to start the process of the deal of the century and the peace process. So during those 4 years, there's not going to be any changes physically in the roads and in the geography. Everything is going to stay the same. After 4 years, we don't know what's going to happen. The idea is that the feeling is that the Palestinians are never ever going to agree to these conditions because they go totally against the principles of their ideology. And so if somehow they will agree to these conditions, then we're moving on to the changes. And those changes are going to happen after 4 years. And we are talking about a number of parts in Judea and Samaria, roads that are going to be blocked for Jewish commute. For example, today I drive from Jerusalem north to my community, Ofra. It takes me about a half an hour. If the program is going to be implemented, then I would have to drive from Jerusalem to the Jordan Valley first, and then drive northward and westward. And that would probably double or triple the time it would take me to get home.
Okay.
So this is just one example. There are a couple of Jewish communities close to the area of the city of Nablus, of Shechem, that are going to really be isolated, and that's a big problem, because if they're isolated, then you basically are suffocating their expansion. People will start leaving these communities because life would be unbearable. And also we have to remember that during those 4 years, there's going to be a building freeze in many of the communities that we're talking about. So all in all, the Trump plan, this deal of the century, is historic. For the first time, it acknowledges Israel's right to Judea and Samaria. It acknowledges the right of Jews to live in the biblical heartland of Israel. I can't believe I say that. Acknowledges the right of Jews to live in the biblical heartland of Israel. That's how ironic it is.
Yeah.
And so these are good things. These are new things that we never had before. And we just have to do whatever we can to change the idea that there's going to be a Palestinian state, that there's suffocation of communities, building freeze, blocking of roads for Jewish commute, which is plain racism, I think. I mean, why can't I drive? Why just because I'm Jewish I can't drive a certain area on the road? I mean, but I have to say that most of the Jews living in Judea and Samaria are grateful for the deal of the century. It's a breath of fresh air after a long period of being on the defense all the time.
Yeah, empty words from American presidents who said, well, we'll move the embassy to Jerusalem, and then never getting around to it. After Congress voted for that more than 20 years ago, President Trump finally did it. And that was a lot of fun being in Jerusalem when that took place. As you remember, the celebrations in the streets there a couple of years ago were just a joy to see and be part of. One final question, because I know that in the news today, Jerusalem Post and other news sources reporting that there are factions in the Knesset that are pushing for a vote on sovereignty as early as this coming Sunday, and that those proposals don't exactly follow the Trump administration's proposals. So, and I know Prime Minister Netanyahu would like to do this with the support of the American government, which right now is distracted, shall we say, not just with the coronavirus outbreak, but with the ongoing protests, which have died down a little bit, but they're still there in the background. So will the Knesset move forward with this, regardless of what the American president says, what the administration does?
Well, the proposal that's going to be discussed on Sunday was proposed by the right-wing party of Yamina, and it's basically because the right-wing party of Yamina is on the opposition. What they're trying to do is to challenge Netanyahu. Will it pass? Will it be delayed to another time? This remains to be seen. I think Netanyahu wants to do it his way. He wants to do it in full coordination with the United States. And by the way, not just with the United States, but also with a few Sunni Arab countries that would support it, but not openly. And also with the East European countries that also ally themselves with Israel and try to block any attempts by Germany or France or Belgium to counter the sovereignty move. So Netanyahu wants to do it his way. He will do it his way, and maybe he's going to cancel that proposal on Sunday and say that it's not the time. We're also very much distracted because of the COVID-19 pandemic here in Israel. Israel was very successful in the last few months dealing with this COVID pandemic, and we're just experiencing the second outbreak at the moment. I would say that we're very distracted by that, and so the sovereignty issue has gone, a bit to the second or third levels of interest. But I definitely think it's going to happen. It's going to happen in the next few weeks. Netanyahu wants to take advantage of the time before the elections in November. He wants to do it ASAP. And after he does it, he wants to pin it to the ground, as we say in Hebrew. He wants to go forward and start doing things that would be unchangeable in case a different administration will be in the United States. And we're praying very hard that President Trump will succeed in the coming elections, not just for Israel and for the sovereignty move and for many other things, but also for the United States. We are looking at the big conflict between right and left in the United States, the divide. And we're very worried here in Israel. So we're praying for you. We're praying for America, for the President Trump, and for the American people.
And likewise, we with you and the settlers, the Jewish settlers in Samaria and Judea. Aaron Lipkin is the CEO of Lipkin Tours. He's also a resident and a spokesperson for his community of Ofra, which is in Samaria, very close to Beit El, and one of the very few tour companies in Israel that will take groups into Samaria and Judea, which is important because that's where 80% of the Bible's history took place. And as far as we know, one of only maybe two tour companies that will go to the odd places we like to go, like Gilgal Rephaim and the fortress of Sisera. So we look forward to the freedom to travel again and seeing you again in the Holy Land.
Amen. Amen. We are looking forward and anxiously for the return of tourists to Israel. And we would really love to see you and Sharon and the group come here and really enjoy firsthand those amazing sights that the Bible, the biblical stories happened there. The biblical heroes walked and roamed the mountains and the valleys and the cities and the villages. And it's every time I hear people say it's on my bucket list, it's on my bucket list to come to Israel, and I totally understand that it's an experience that will change your life.
Amen to that. Thank you, Aaron, and thank you for watching as we keep watch. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is 5 in 10 from Skywatch TV.
COVID-19 has changed everything. Because of the coronavirus, we can't bring the sold-out Defender Conference to Branson this year. So we decided if we can't bring the conference to Branson, we'll bring it to you instead. Skywatch TV's 2020 Defender Conference is going virtual. If you thought you were going to miss out because you couldn't travel to Branson this year, or because the conference sold out too quickly, now see and hear world-class speakers, cutting-edge presentations in the comfort of your own home. And to make it better, we're adding new speakers like Steve Quayle and New York Times best-selling author Joel Richardson. And don't miss what Tom Horn says will be his last conference presentation ever. Plus, we'll add all of the presentations from the 2019 Defender Conference, so you're getting 2 conferences for the price of 1. Sign up now, Skywatch TV's 2020 Defender Conference. Virtual, but bigger than ever. It goes live August 27th, 2020. For information and registration, log on to DefenderConference.com. That's DefenderConference.com.